2040, and there are only two powers left in the world. The militia known as the Resistance, whose goal is to send the new world into chaos. And only one thing stands in its way, the Confederation.
In 1945, at the end of World War II, Germany has capitulated as soon as the Soviet army crossed its border. This led to a separation of the post-war world into two powerful alliances of states, the North Atlantic Confederation and the Great Asian Alliance. The economic disparity and arms race have made a full-scale war between the two sides an inevitability. The war between the two alliances has ended in a decisive victory of the North Atlantic Confederation. This success allowed it to reinforce its position as the world hegemon, and soon all other countries of the world joined the alliance, including those from the defeated Great Asian Alliance. The Global Confederation was formed, governed by the Senate, where all member nations' representatives were gathered. 2 decades after the formation of the Global Confederation, and the future looked bright for humanity, as many advancements were made in science and technology, diseases were eradicated, and the Space Control Center was formed, which I'll go into more depth on later. There was also the decision to significantly downscale the military's budget and to destroy the world's nuclear warheads in an event referred to as the World Disarmament. However, the Senate didn't always make decisions with all nations and peoples in mind, which led to discord and disillusionment within humanity towards the Senate, which I will cover in later videos about the resistance and the war at large.
As I've said before, the Confederation was governed by a Senate, and this Senate has representatives from all of the member nations, and they were responsible for the military, economic, and political affairs of the Confederation. However, the game implies that some senators had more power or influence than others. There were also ministers to administer some departments, and one of these ministers being Minister Joseph Hayne, however, due to how he acts towards the Senate and how many real-life Senates work. Ministers are still second-hand to the Senate. Most military decisions were carried out by a central command. However, how this command operates, where it's located, and other questions remain. If an individual wanted to reach a commissioned officer rank in the Confederation Peacekeeping Corps, they would have to be trained by the Confederation Military Academy, where if they passed, they were given the rank of Lieutenant Grade 1, then they could be promoted to Lieutenant Grade 2, then Lieutenant Grade 3, then 3 grades of Captain, then 3 grades of Major, then 3 grades of Primary, Major, then 3 grades of Commander, then 3 grades of Lieutenant Colonel, and then Colonel, then up to General of the Army. Security service personnel were referred to as agents. For the offshoots of the Confederation, there are several, one of these being the Confederation Security Service, which is the premier intelligence service for the Confederation, most likely influenced by the Ukrainian Security Service, and were formed during the Peruvian conflict. They were first publicly seen in a small Brazilian village named Ayayo, where they interrogated locals for intel on the whereabouts of missing officers. However, the methods of interrogation used by these agents could be described as nothing short of torture, which led to severe military pressure as a response by the resistance. However, thanks to the efforts of the platoon assigned as protection for these agents, they were able to make it back home unharmed with the intel on the officers. They were then mentioned in passing as Confederation forces had to clear a route for them into the Mexican city of Veracruz. They are finally seen again in the Battle of Newfoundland, where they provide the intel that the resistance officers were attempting to flee by sea, and their last confirmed appearance is in the story, Heist of a Lifetime, where the investigator is sent to investigate a security breach of the Kairouan base in North Africa, and also interrogates Myers before being killed by a Jaguar strike. Yet another branch of the Confederation is the Space Control Center, which is responsible for the Confederation's satellites, which are used for both reconnaissance and offensive purposes. It was formed after the NACVGAA War. However, it wouldn't be until after the Peruvian conflict that any serious offensive use would be developed, and development of these prototypes continued even after the war spewed into a large global conflict and would reach development with centers and bases established across the USA and Canada. Even after the resistance's best efforts to destroy, launch, capture the sites, and after the discovery of nuclear weapons in the hands of the rebels, the Senate were pushed into the allowance of powerful space strikes. Another branch of the Confederation was the Confederation Military Academy, which was responsible for training officers and personnel for more sensitive duties, such as operating heroes. The Confederation preferred to achieve technological and numerical superiority in all aspects of warfare, almost disregarding stealth and inconspicuousness entirely, focusing completely on raw firepower and protection, opting to completely crush any opposition on land, air, sea, and space. To go into more depth, the Confederation chose heavily armored and fortified infantry, vehicles, and naval vessels at the cost of them being slow, expensive, and conspicuous, and choosing to opt for an almighty approach to space, going for immensely powerful space strikes capable of eviscerating almost anything on the planet anytime, and the only exclusion to this heavy-handed approach being its air force, which I will cover in a later video. If you were to compare the two factions' approach to warfare, the resistance would be that of a carefully concealed but blunt dagger, and the Confederation's that of a crushing hammer meant to destroy anything in its path. After the full establishment of the space program, any serious threat to Europe was over, apart from harassment from resistance commando units, meaning it and Cuba remained safe havens for the Confederation. However, Africa, Asia, and the Americas remain contested territory with the resistance, and Peru is still under the complete dominion of the insurgents, and the question still remains as to whether the Senate will be able to convert its economy into war economy. After the Libyan missile crisis, the Confederation is fully prepared to use space strikes in its battles, and hero technologies developed alongside the syndicate. As the Confederation continues its global front war against the resistance, even though the two sides are caught in a seemingly endless tug-of-war for global domination, the people of Earth can rest easy knowing the Confederation is on their side. They beat the barbaric PLA and have managed to stalemate the resistance at every single turn. And with their technology advancing by the day, the Confederation remains the sole shining beacon for humanity.